Welcome to Mindfulness Manufacturing. My name is Trevor Blondeel. Spending 25 years in manufacturing, I discovered the real impact we have on turnover, communication, and the ability to manage change is how we show up. That's the essence of emotional intelligence. In each episode, we bring a guest or message to expand your skills, engage your people, and grow your organization. So let's jump in. Well, as we continue to see this trend in manufacturing of struggling organizations, often because of manpower, COVID, different things, I wanted to bring in an expert. And fortunately, I knew Mike Forhan of Crossover. He's been working in manufacturing for over 30 years, a variety of environments, and just an expert at transformations. And right now, we see a lot of manufacturing operations in transformation, in different crisis modes. And this is what Crossover does. So Mike sees different things across the world in these areas, and his expertise is around operationally distressed, troubled, and high-risk supplier intervention and risk mitigation, crisis management, and interim management and leadership. Wow, isn't that a mouthful? And that's a lot of different things, but they're real and they're happening. And excited to have you on here today, Mike.
Thank you, Trevor. Appreciate being here.
So we got mindfulness manufacturing, and we're always trying to think of, how are we more present? How are we more aware? And I can't even imagine once you get to these places of crisis, how are you connecting and how do you bring that level of temperature down when you're going into these places that I'm sure people are very stressed? What's the first thing you do to help bring some calmness?
That's a really loaded question, Trevor. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, these aren't pre-scripted.
So, part of the challenge in being involved with what I do is exactly what you're saying, is how do you walk into a situation that is really under the gun, has a lot of eyes on it, has a lot of exposure because of the risk that it potentially can create with an OEM, with a tier one supplier, and the relationships that exist between those two entities. How I go in is really, really a challenge. There's no doubt about it in my mind. I have to go in thoughtful and respectful of what it is that I'm going to see. And I don't always know what I'm going to see. All I typically understand is that there's a lot of people with a lot of emotion that are out there and have become intolerant of a situation. That's why I get asked to go in. And so when I think about how do I just try to bring a sense of calmness or try to be in a sense of understanding is really, really important. So we all go in and we all have a preconceived notion of what we expect to see. And that's part of the challenge, is putting that bias aside while you go in and start to listen to what's going on, listen to the various perspectives that happen around there. There's no doubt in my mind, we all have our benchmarks of what we expect performance to be. And then measuring against those benchmarks is important. But listening to how the company got to where it is also just as important for understanding what you can do to work with that organization to carve a path forward. And
some context, you're getting 24 hours notice before they want you there?
Yeah, sometimes less.
Sometimes less.
Our typical response time, we try to have our response time within 24 hours of a particularly crisis call. If it's a crisis call, if it's a 911 event, if we have more time, then I can certainly put out an information request, which sets an organization on notice with respect to what it is that I'll be looking for when I come in, so that they have some concept of what it is that is meaningful to me, is meaningful to my client, and so they can at least be prepared. But oftentimes it's less notice than that, where I'm on a plane and heading there and calling the troubled supplier and saying, hey, I'm on my way. I'll be there at 8:00 tonight. Appreciate if you can open the door and let me in. And so those situations are challenging. There's no doubt about it. And but they are what they are. And part of the part of the knowledge that I have is and helps me be calm around those situations is I didn't create the issue. I'm just going in to really understand what the issues are so that I can provide clarity around what to do about the situation and how to work our way out of it.
So I look at it as the thermometer is high. It's usually always going to be high when you go in there. And anybody can relate to this. Things are hot and they need a thermostat, somebody that can bring that temperature down, because we know that when we're a little bit calmer, we're able to make better decisions. And that's just how our brains work. So how do you get that temperature down as soon as you get in there, right? Because obviously someone from the outside coming in is always sometimes a little bit stressful in itself. But what's your approach here?
What I attempt to do, Trevor, is walk in with a sense of listening to understand. You're exactly right, and obviously with me showing up, if it's a client that's putting me into a situation, if that's my entrance, there's even more anxiety. You know,
Yeah.
I'm showing up. I'm there on behalf of their customer. Traditionally, back when we grew up in manufacturing, that would be a very heavy-handed approach.
Mm-hmm.
Less so now, which is great. There's a lot more rationale into how we methodically approach what's going on. And I think, having some standards on expectations, to go in and say, here's what I want to do, and have a methodology around how do I discover what's really going on so that, I put some data behind the emotion. And you're right, to just to de-escalate all of the emotion around it is part of the sense of, how you work through things. So you're right, Trevor, the temperature is typically high, particularly if I'm put in by a supplier's client.
Mm-hmm.
There can be more anxiety when I walk in than I'd like there to be. Oftentimes I'm met with a defensive posture. People are wondering why it got here and why they have a quote unquote third party walking in on behalf of an OEM. And one of the things I try to do is reassure that particular situation that I'm there to understand what's really going on. And my initial assessment, my initial mission is to really go through and characterize how we got here. What is the actual risk of the situation that we're involved in? And then start to figure out, how do we work our way out of this? I often characterize that at fixing the plane while we're flying it. And, I try to make light of some of the things that we can do initially, just to calm everything down and get a sense of where we're at. Characterizing the risk is extremely important. It's extremely important in terms of a lot of things that must go on. It's extremely important from the OEM perspective, if that's how I went in, because they really truly want to understand how many vehicles are at risk, or what's the situation if my supply chain dries up. How much time do I have to work through a potential problem before it has a devastating impact and I'm shutting down an assembly plant, which in our business is a devastating impact.
Oh yeah.
And it gets measured by the minute, it gets measured by the second, it doesn't get measured by the day. There's jobs and millions of dollars at risk here on these situations. So, that's why the emotions are typically very high. Providing that sense of clarity around how to work through those issues, bringing in an understanding of years of going into a variety of manufacturing environments helps to lend some calmness to it, knowing that I've personally worked through many of these situations and I'm fortunate enough to have very good outcomes. That's helpful. It starts to lend some confidence that the person who's there understands what it is that needs to be done.
Got the empathy.
So that's also really important. You're not new at it, right? And
Here's one for you. You're the president. You've got 1,200 people in your organization. What's an example of maybe where you haven't been able to go yourself? It hasn't gone as well. And then what correction have you made for that, or what have you learned from that? Because I'm sure overall your experience that you can't be everywhere all the time. As leaders, we all struggle with that, and we all learn from maybe a situation that didn't go exactly where we wanted. We had to make an adjustment. Anything come to mind?
Oh, lots come to mind. For me in particular, Trevor, um, for many years I was relegated to the hottest spots. But that's not to say that there aren't some very warm temperatures that are brewing that
Mhm.
I've had to put in very capable, trusted people on my team. And frankly, I have a wonderful team of talented people that have all been there and done that. Most of my bench is over 25 to 30 years worth of experience. They've come up, from the shop floor, been general managers, been directors, been vice presidents. So I'm very, very fortunate that I have a deep bench of talent that I can trust to go and do the right thing. Inside my organization, we sponsor the training of people so that they know the right way to go in to de-escalate the temperature of a particular situation. So those situations where I've had people walk in that are in, natural disasters or hurricane relief or floods, or people are unable to get to the plant because roads are shut down. Whatever the situation is, we had a situation where a tornado ripped through a plant and tore the roof off, and the roof was half hanging down, but we still needed parts, right? We needed to
Yeah.
run manufacturing, and going in and figuring out, so what do we do to manage potential tool moves or business transfers, or to even get the power to the assets and put in the right capability to manage that plant. We're there to help. And it's often the method and message that I want our guys to always carry to the supply side is, we're there to help. We're not necessarily there to criticize how you got here or tear it apart or rip the situation apart. We're just there to really figure out what is and what we need to do next to make it better. And so
So
that helpful approach, I think, is calming, can cool the temperature. And when people see us get to work and roll up our own sleeves, there's a sense of purpose there that people know we're not just there to beat them up with a hammer.
so have you seen it not go well?
I've seen it be challenged
Hmm.
in terms of our ability to help. Oftentimes, the ego of an organization gets in its way of being accepting of help. From time to time, we see that suppliers want to take the approach that we're the experts, we'll figure it out. We don't need you. We don't need you or your team to come in and tell us what is and tell us how to do our business better. We're the experts, we'll get it done. Well, frankly, and this is where just trying to talk through the issues becomes really important. Our ability to articulate through the issues becomes extremely important. And that is, so let's characterize what is. Let's characterize what the situation truly is then, so that we can then start to work on, what do we consider to be normal. Try not to challenge the overarching leadership that says we're the experts, we don't need you. Well, at the end of the day, part of the challenge is, if you're the experts, why are you here? What instigated this underperformance that resulted in you being unable to supply, not grasping the technology or implementing the technology that you promised, unable to deliver the contract that you've signed up to? What has actually led us here, so that we understand, so that we can help to articulate what is going on with the client or customer that you have, so that we can all get on the same page, right? Because the client is sitting there saying, hey, we don't trust you anymore. And you're sitting there saying, I'm the best that there is in the business. Well, okay, so something between that is probably more truthful. And we just need to figure out what it is so that we can work our way through it.
I like that, the challenge. Sometimes I hear people say, I need to challenge you on that. And I'm like, okay, so you're basically like triggering the person even before you're going to bring up what you say.
Right.
You're already putting them on edge. But I like what you're saying, Mike, where you're just like, hey, what do we know for sure? Like what's the facts that we have here? Because obviously, when we talk a lot about, we want to recognize the emotions, we want to keep the temperature down because we make better decisions. How do we do that? go back to what we know for sure. And you said this in the beginning, it's coming, what's the data? It's not what can we produce or what have we done? It's what's our historical numbers show,
Right.
and what's that demand? And I don't want to get too much into that aspect, but I do love that aspect, because that is part of the emotional intelligence strategy, is just, let's bring it back to what do we know for sure. Let's ground each other here. And our friend Andrew DeHaan, I always go back to his saying where he's like, Trevor, can you really take help from someone that you don't trust? Right. Or what else he'll say is, can you trust someone that doesn't care about you? So how do you foster those relationships, Mike? You got to build trust quickly. So how do we do that? Because I'm sure there's listeners out there right now that they maybe just inside their own four walls have this chaotic situation. And maybe it's, we see those silos between departments and things are heated. If someone's going into their plant today, what's something they can do to help build that trust and show that care?
Great question. So, Trevor, foundational to trust is awareness, right? So when we think about our ability, so we've got a couple things working in our favor at Crossover. We've got experience. So, we've got years of experience. And when I think of, our 225 guys with over 25, 30 years experience, and then our affiliated networks with another, 1,000 people, with various levels of experience, when you run the multiplication, it's pretty hard to come back and say, well, I don't believe you have the experience to help me, right? Because that's really not the case.
But what if I know you got the experience, but it's kind of like,
yeah,
I'm still stressed out. And when we get stressed out, we have a tighter bandwidth to develop relationships.
right.
So if you take that experience away and they don't care about the experience, how are you building that trust? Like, how are you just as a person connecting to another person? What are we doing here that someone that just in their plant today can do? How do you have that? Like, how do you in those situations create that relationship at this accelerated rate, which you do?
So if I remove the experience, which is really hard to do because that's what put us in a situation, is our experience and the trust that we've already cultivated with the clients that want us to go into a situation. And, I seem to be talking a lot about the 911 or troubled, distress supply type situation. And there's more than just that. But when we walk into a situation that is under duress, it's our experience that has got us there, and our success of our experience that has got us there. What we attempt to do in trying to cultivate those relationships is share that with the situation, share that with the leaders of that situation. We are a trusted supplier of talent to our clients. That's why they recommend that we go in. That's why they recommend that suppliers just open the doors and accept the support that we could potentially provide. Just listen, right? Listen to what we might have to say, and we're in turn listening to what they have to say. Part of, I guess, developing that trust quickly has to do with how authentic we are. We've been there and done it. We roll our sleeves up. And so not only do we talk about our comfort level on the shop floor, dealing with people that are manufacturing parts, operating equipment, so on and so forth, we're comfortable all the way through articulating that situation, that experience right through to the boardroom. So having the ability to work all the way along the chain that is sitting in manufacturing, I think is truly important. A lot of our team has zero issue in doing that. And we often talk about, our ability to walk in, roll our sleeves up, work our way to a sustainable, stable environment, and then try to coach and mentor the outcomes so that we can bring in people and establish capable resources that we know what we've done in terms of building stability will result in something that is more sustainable than what we walked into. That, doing it time and time again builds the credibility that we have as Crossover, builds the credibility that we have as individuals within Crossover. Our ability just to get the job done, helps build that reputation, right? And so when people know that they're bringing in somebody from Crossover, we've got a certain reputation in the marketplace that we're very good at what we do. And we come by it honestly because we do work hard at it.
People feel safe around others that are just like them.
Right.
And oftentimes you've gone into places where you've been in those shoes. How do you create that empathy? Like what do those conversations look like? And how vulnerable do you need to be to create that connection?
Oftentimes initially walking in is approaching it with an openness, to share experiences. And it's not necessarily storytelling. Sometimes it is, right? Good leaders have good stories. They're able to capture an audience in a certain way.
Stories.
Right. And a lot of the war stories that we all care and the battle scars that we all care of, being in the trenches and trying to figure out how to get things done. We carry all of them, and we've got them to show. And so, oftentimes when people, it's a good point, when people understand that you've been there and done it, and you're not coming from a typical consulting practice doesn't have people with those real experiences and those real scars to share, it can be more of a challenge. Our vulnerability to, I think is expressed in terms of our willingness to listen to what people have to say. Because we know it's not just all one-sided. We know that there's a couple stories that led us to the situation that we particularly are walking into, and being open to listen to it is huge. We're not their customer. We're a third party that's walking in with what we talk about is we've got a very clear lens on what it is that we're willing to accept, we're willing to share, and that we're going to try and work through that situation in as open and honest format as we possibly can. Many times the relationships between the supplier and customer are broken down, and rebuilding those relationships, rebuilding that trust is something that we're able to do to come in, because not only does the client in this particular case trust us, they've asked us to go in and work with the supplier to say, hey, what can we do here? Oftentimes there's some apprehension because it's the client driving at this third party to come in. Well, if we're invited in, we understand we're a guest at that particular supplier's location, and we're respectful of that. People have worked hard to get to where they're at. We want to listen to their story, and we want to understand what it is that they're challenged with, and help them work through that.
I like that. Understand that you're a guest. And I think that's a great mindset to have, if you're in that situation. And there's another person I worked with, John Guston, had this great example of when people would come in from the outside, he called them pointer outers. And, and I'll never forget that, right? Oh yeah, I know that person. He's a pointer outer.
Yeah.
And meaning that they don't help, they just tell you what's wrong. And right. Unfortunately, I mean, that's a reputation sometimes where the poor consultants will get. So how does Mike Forhan, with all your knowledge, because it's naturally hardwired in all of us, we love to judge. I can't believe they're not doing this. Or like, how did it get this way? And that is a real, like, as human beings, we struggle. Just sometimes I'll see one on the street and I'll see someone that I don't even know. And I start thinking, well, why is this person like this? And it's like, why are you even judging them? Like, why did they even come into your brain? So how do you keep you and your team and just out of that judgment mode and staying in caring, helping mode?
Sometimes, Trevor, that's really hard.
Well, if you told me you never did it, I tell you
it's really hard.
Check back in a couple weeks for part 2 of Michael Forhan and how does he stay out of judgment mode. Hey folks, appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Haven't subscribed yet? Do it now. Remember, if you want results, the key is increasing your awareness of how you show up.